Welcome back to the Marvel Movie Minute, a daily podcast in which we explore the films of the Marvel Cinematic Universe 1 minute at a time. In this, our 5th season, we are looking at Joe Johnston's 2011 film Captain America, The First Avenger. I'm Andy Nelson from the Next Reel Film Podcast. Sadly, Pete fell off the train over a frozen gorge and I couldn't save him. Fingers crossed, though, we'll be able to track him down before next week, and we'll see what happens. Today we are talking about minute 86, which begins with Steve climbing down toward Bucky and ends with Dr. Zola's long look at a medical table. Joining us on the show, one of our guests from the first season, it's Lorraine Dahm. Hello, Lorraine.
Hello. Greetings, everyone.
Thrilled to have you here to talk about this minute, especially because this is a pretty big, pretty important moment for one of our characters here, because this is the end of James Buchanan Bucky Barnes as he falls off the side of the train. But it starts, we kind of left last week on this cliffhanger with Bucky literally hanging off the side of the train over this gorge as the train kind of goes along the tracks through the winter in the Alps. And Steve is trying to kind of figure out how to save him. And here we have him starting to climb down toward him and stuff. How does all of this work for you? And the way that it plays, do you enjoy the way that this scene plays out?
Yeah, I am a big Bucky fan. So to see sort of the beginning of the end and the whole new beginning for him it's an interesting way to see how he rises by falling. As one of the great things about the Bucky and Steve pairing is that their stories often parallel. What happens to one happens to the other, and it's usually on a spectrum where what happens to one is good, and then the same thing will happen to another, but it's a bad ending. And so where they parallel here is that at the end of the second movie, when Steve falls, Bucky does jump after him.
Right.
To pull him out of the Potomac. And so I did a little numbers math on that just to see if it was fair to judge Steve for not jumping. And the Alps are about 6,000 to 8,000 feet tall, and the helicarriers, I couldn't really figure out how high they were, but being that one crashed into the 42nd story of the Triskelon, I did the math from there, which is about 588 feet. So I feel that Steve was probably made the right choice in not jumping after Bucky.
Yeah, to be fair, at least he's not like on the top of the Alps and Bucky's not falling to the bottom of the Alps. He's only falling in this gorge. So, it's probably closer to that 500 feet or so. But yeah, I think that it's a funny thing there. And also, I think there's this element that, we've talked about it quite a bit. I know we've already had our montage, and it's been a few years now that Steve has had his powers, and so he's started kind of figuring out what he can do, what he can't do. He's been kind of getting a handle on that better. But I still think there are probably some things that he hasn't quite experienced yet. When he jumped out of an airplane earlier in this film, he used a parachute, and we see him not doing that later. So at some point, there's probably going to be some experimentation with how far can I fall and still be okay? And at this point, he just may not be quite there yet.
Right. Well, falling is such a human fear that, we tend to forget superheroes for the most part are human beings, and falling is one of our great fears. So I don't blame him for not jumping after Bucky, but it is, again, one of those parallel things where Bucky did jump after him, which I think shows more about Bucky than Steve's reluctance to jump after Bucky.
Do you like the way that Sebastian Stan portrays him in, I guess specifically just this film at this point? Do you enjoy his portrayal?
Yeah. I think Sebastian Stan as a whole has played sort of the guy who knows he's good looking and knows attracts the girls and can choose to either be a decent person anyways, or, benefit from that in ways that we don't necessarily consider socially good. And I think he did a very good job earlier in the film of showing jealousy. And, I was always the A guy in our little pairing. And now I'm, not even B or C. I'm like F compared to you. And so I think it was fun to see the jealousy, and it was fun to see him grow out of that too and still remain loyal to Steve and loyal to everything.
Do you think that, in this film, we really only get that playing out with Peggy, and, she had already from earlier on kind of shown that there was a draw to Steve. And I know there's the whole thing, like, she have still fallen for him had he remained the puny version of himself, or is she only attracted to him because he got all hot and stuff? But do you think that it would have helped the film if there had been a few other instances with women, like in situations like in bars or things where you could see that Bucky is still finding himself second fiddle? Or do you feel like just the one moment with Peggy is enough?
I think the one moment with Peggy is enough. The fact that he never argued for to be busted up higher. He's still a sergeant. He's still, taking orders. I think that's part of his personality, at least in the beginning, at least from the start. There was talk that he was probably drafted rather than volunteered for the Army. There was some talk on Reddit about his numbers and stuff, which I luckily, as a female, haven't had to pay attention to.
Actually, according to the wiki, he and Steve actually went right after the bombing of Pearl Harbor and put their names in. And then, of course, Steve didn't get taken. Okay.
Yeah. So, I always feel like he is more of he knows in his soul. He's not a sidekick, but he's not the leader always.
Gotcha. Well, here's another interesting question, because we see him fall presumably to his death. Like, for an audience who had no idea about the character of Bucky Barnes going into this film, and that he is a character that figures more prominently in later stories with Steve in the comics, how do you feel that this plays? Like, do you feel like this is carrying the emotional weight that it would need for an audience who doesn't know that? Or do you feel like it's not carrying the emotional weight because it's really kind of like, for all those comic fans, they know that we're setting something up here? Like, do you think that it's working in both capacities?
Yeah. In movies like this, somebody generally has to die, which is unfortunate, but that's kind of how you get the quick emotional low point for the main character. And I think the best friend, because obviously you don't want Peggy to die, you can't have Captain America die, and there's nobody else who's really poignant enough, I guess. The Howling Commandos were an awesome little group, but that's kind of all they were. They weren't, they were more Bucky's friends than Steve's, due to the cut footage and stuff where you see them actually fighting. So I feel like it is, he's a pretty young man with a lot of hopes and dreams ahead of him, and he dies a horrible, brave death.
It's an emotional stakes sort of thing, right? Like, by him dying, the film is saying, we're letting you know that people can die, and we're allowing that emotional level to be there for our characters.
Yeah, and it was not somebody didn't shoot him. Even though that's what got him out on the end of the train, was being shot at. But it was just a horrible accident, really, if you in a way, obviously caused by enemies and war and everything that was happening prior. But it still was just a tragic moment in a war full of tragic moments.
Right. We find out later, I believe in Winter Soldier, that, he survives this fall due to Zola's experiments, and the Soviet armed forces find him and they'll imprison him, and it kind of goes from there. We really have no idea what Zola was doing with him, and he didn't have him for a very long time. It was only, maybe up to a month is about as long as he had for him. But I don't know. I do you get a sense? I don't know. The way that he was strapped to the table, it almost seemed more like water torture or something rather than experiments. And I mean, I know Zola is kind of this mad scientist who presumably was doing things, but I guess the thing that piques my curiosity and I find it interesting is that there's no sign, like once Bucky gets out and like Steve helps him escape, he never, I mean, there are a few moments where it's like, is he having PTSD? You know, he seems a little more weary than some of the other troops, but like once everybody's kind of cleaned up after that initial rescue, like there's nothing that I'm getting from him that shows me that, you know, there might be some, you know, things triggering in him still. Do you feel like we needed anything to kind of get a hint that, you know, he still is suffering from whatever it was Zola was doing to him?
Yeah. I have two ways of thinking about this. The first one is there's this great meme going around, or it was going around. It's probably dated by now.
We can start it again.
Yes, where it shows the two transformations of him into the Winter Soldier and Steve into Captain America. And it replays their conversation from earlier when Steve is rescuing Bucky. And it was saying like, you know, I thought you were taller. And then it was like, did it hurt? Is it permanent? He's asking all these questions about the process. And people have sort of surmised that was him trying to figure out what exactly Zola was doing to him and what were going to be the consequences. Again, that sort of parallel story.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, the first time I saw this movie, I thought he was mostly just suffering PTSD, plus still processing Steve being Captain America, plus, you know, a relatively innocent, even though he was a New Yorker, person all of a sudden thrown into these world events. And I just thought he was exhausted and jealous and, you know, had too many emotions and not enough time to get through them all.
Yeah, it's interesting how it plays, and I always do wonder about that. Like, are we getting enough to hint to the possibilities that there may be something more to Bucky that would allow him to survive? I mean, because, you know, it's not like, well, what we were already joking last week in our conversation about this trip to the train and how none of the team was wearing gloves except for Captain America, the one who is the super soldier. Everyone else, they're bare hands. They don't have hats on. It's like this. You're in the Alps, up in the mountains in the middle of winter. What are you doing? You're all going to get frostbite and go into hypothermia. Like it's crazy. And here Bucky is like falling off the side of a train in this weather, and we can see what's below him. It's like, well, you're going to either land in a snowbank next to the river or land in the frozen river. Either way, it's going to be damn cold, and you're likely going to be, you know, banged up and bleeding. Like, how do you survive this? And it's funny, you know, I know they do. It's a very hand wavy thing, and, you know, they don't have to do the hand waves until several movies down the road. So I think that gives them a lot of leeway as far as being able to just write it off with a line like, yeah, you know, he survived because of Zola's experiments and the Russians found him. Like, it's very hand wavy. There are moments like that where I'm like, I wish that when I rewatched this, I wish that it's one of those like Sixth Sense sorts of moments where I wish I could rewatch and go, oh, I didn't catch that little thing. And that gives me a clue as to like how he was able to actually do this, you know?
Yeah, like they don't even set up like a scene of some people in that gorge doing a science experiment or something. Yeah.
Right. That was my other question. It's like, how does anyone know where he fell? It's like, yeah, it's like, you know, especially like Soviet armed forces were here in the Alps. Like, why were the Soviets over here?
Yeah.
And like, I mean, obviously the Allies know that he fell. So presumably, like, I would like to think that Steve, being somebody who, you know, is very, you know, this is his best friend, and obviously he's a very patriotic person, and would likely say, let's go figure out how we can retrieve his body. And I'd like to think that they, you know, the Allies would have gone in there to try to find him and bring him back. And knowing Steve and, you know, what we've been joking about like this insane, like super ability to like with photographic memory and everything. I'd like to think that he would be able to know exactly where Bucky fell, but somehow other people get to him first, I guess, is what happens.
Well, I mean, considering the Russians were allies, maybe they found him and then just were like, nope, we didn't. We looked.
Yeah.
Here, we found his arm. You know?
Yeah. Well, it's funny that you mentioned that. In the script, and this really would have been setting it up for the next film, when the trooper blasts at Bucky, Steve actually grabs Bucky and is holding on to Bucky, and then the trooper shoots again and hits, it says, vaporizing Bucky's arm into a blue mist, and then Bucky falls tumbling into the bottomless gorge. So it's interesting, in the script, you actually have a moment where Steve has saved Bucky, and this trooper blasts his arm off, and he falls into the gorge. That would have been obviously a lot more foreshadowing for the missing arm that we end up with in the later films. Also, I guess it would have led to a lot of questions about how the Tesseract weaponry works, and maybe that's why they reworked it, because every time we've seen the Tesseract hit anybody, the whole thing vaporizes, like their whole body vaporizes. Like, why would it just be his arm? That might have been what the team was looking at when they decided, let's not do that. But yeah, I wonder if that would have played at all, though,
Yeah, well, it might have explained a little bit of super serum then, too, where it only vaporized the arm versus
that's
the
true.
whole body.
That's true. Give us a hint that something else that Zola had been doing with him.
Right.
For sure. Yeah. All right. So Bucky falls. This is a picture wrap on Sebastian Stan for the film. We're not going to have any more. But you're a big Sebastian Stan, I guess we can say.
Yes.
I mean, do you like the arc that they've had him play over the course of the franchise?
Oh, yeah. It's kind of what got me into Marvel more than just going to the movies with my husband. It suddenly became I want to see this movie too type thing. I think women in general just sort of, I mean, he's gorgeous, so that helps. But I think just the story of somebody who had a ton of agency taken away from them and had to do what they were told and put into this, literally put into a box and, only taken out when you were good for something. I think that speaks a lot to women and agency and just finding yourself. And he has been entirely loyal through this thing. He values a friendship, which is rare for male to male relations in movies. Usually it's the love interest who gets kind of all of the hero's emotional attention. So to see a really great friendship on the film it's nice. I just think it's a very surprisingly touching emotional thread throughout an action series.
Can you think of any other friendships like that in the Marvel franchise where it's just a solid friendship? It's not a romantic relationship that has been developed well. I'm trying to think of any.
Yeah, the Science Bros, Tony Stark and Bruce Banner, I think. Okay. They have more of a bickering, like it's not the true loyalty that Steve and Bucky have, but they have, it's definitely a friendship and a let's hang out and let's, we're going to have emotionally satisfying conversations. I think Marvel overall does a good job at showing people having friendships and emotional connections beyond just your one true romance.
I suppose if just trying to think of other ones, I would say that Peter Parker and Ned, they've been developed really well in their films.
Yes.
I think that's a set of friends that seems like really strongly developed.
Right. Thor and Loki, I mean, they're antagonistic a lot of the time, but they are brothers and they have a very brotherly relationship, I feel like. I mean, they have their true bickers and then they have their, just brothers razzing each other.
Right.
And so and then like, especially when they brought in the sister for Ragnarok and how, I mean, it was like Thor and his two goth siblings. So, I think, or like Thor and, oh gosh, I can't think of her name right now.
Like Valkyrie?
Tessa Thompson.
Yeah, Valkyrie.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, there's some are kind of like we're besties right now for this film because we're in it together. But for the most part, there's very good friendships.
Yeah. Well, okay. So Bucky is gone. Rest in peace, Bucky, at the bottom of the gorge. We see the train, and finally we get to see Gabe again. It was very strange, and I'm still not completely thrilled about how all of this was structured, because you have the whole team up on top of this ridge. Only 3 of them zip line down to the train. I don't know why the whole team doesn't just go. I feel like it's what are they going to do? Like, how are they going to catch up to the train to help at all? It seems so strange to me, but whatever. Gabe joins them, though, and what we saw Gabe do is he stood on top of the train, or he actually knelt on top of the train with his gun pointed at the door, almost as if, he was there just in case someone came out. And that was kind of like writing his character off for the entire action scene that takes place inside the train when Steve and Bucky go in and get separated and all of this stuff happens. And so Gabe Jones is kind of completely dropped, and it was very strange and frustrating to me. At this point, though, we finally see, okay, so this is what Gabe had been doing. I wish they had set this up for us so that we knew, and he wasn't just, left kneeling on the train. It was so strange to me. Anyway, what he has been doing, apparently this whole time, is working his way toward the engine of the train. And here we see him just as it's about to go into a tunnel. He breaks the glass window on the moon roof in the train. I'm not exactly sure what. And then he drops into the engine room, into the engineer's booth that Zola has set up with all of his monitors and his Snowpiercer, weird circular thing at the front, the Tesseract energy for the train, all that good stuff. But Jones drops in here and holds his gun up to Dr. Zola, and there's a Hydra trooper in here. And that's kind of the end of the scene. In the script, actually, Jones even gets a line. He says, "Stop this goddamn train." I don't know why they don't let him say that. He just kind of stands there with his gun up, and we cut. Any last thoughts about this location on the train, about the train itself, about Gabe Jones, and the capture of Zola? Any last thoughts here before we head back to London?
I loved the Howling Commandos, so I wish they would have gotten just a little bit more than a montage. Like you said, it would have been fun to see Gabe kind of crawling from car to car in what we can assume is slippery, icy train going 80 miles an hour with a lot of winds and God knows what falling off the mountain. So I think that would have kind of looked a little bit more heroic, like I am focused on this mission and I am going to get Zola. And then, I don't necessarily think he needed that line, but I think he could have had one little quip and it would have been kind of like a good send off for the Howling Commandos too, because we don't see much of them afterwards either.
Yeah, right. They're going to thin out quite a bit here. It would have been nice. It would have been nice. But, maybe they'll come back in some other capacity down the road in a one shot or a series or something.
Yeah, I was hoping they would get a Marvel series, but I don't know. Maybe it's war is not the interest that it used to be.
Yeah, right. There's always that. All right. Well, we go back to London. And back to the exterior of the Allied headquarters. According to the Marvel Wiki, this is February 3rd, 1945, just 2 days after the train and the capture of Arnim Zola. So once they caught him on February 1st, it was just a couple days to arrange transportation, get him up to London. And we see a brief glimpse of the Daily Mail outside. It says, "War rages in Europe, London burning." So now we know that the bombings are taking place here. Otherwise, it's just kind of people bustling by. Any thoughts from you about this exterior shot of London, or should we head into the interrogation room?
I thought it was a little too quick. Like the first time it happened, I didn't realize they were back in London. I thought they were just at some Allied base, somewhere behind the lines, I guess. So it it took me a bit, like, I think it was like the third watching where I'm like, oh, they're not in Europe. They're further back. They're in London.
Yeah, right. All right, so we're going down into presumably some of the lower levels of the Allied headquarters. This is an interrogation room that we go into, and we see the door open, and Dr. Arnim Zola steps inside. He's looking much less put together than he has been up to this point, and it looks like an MP kind of brings him in. And he doesn't have his coats on or anything. He's got his shirt like half tucked in, and no hat, and just, he looks a little, worse for wear. And the MP gives him his glasses, and I think that's an interesting element that I don't know. I guess I didn't really think about that much, but would they? I guess they would take the glasses and check them just to make sure there's nothing with him or anything?
I think he was on suicide watch. I don't know if you need a trigger warning for that. I think he was on suicide watch. They took his glasses and his belt and his other items, which are generally used for trying to kill yourself. And they even talk about how, he didn't bite the cyanide pill when most Hydra officials have.
That's interesting. I didn't really think about the suicide watch element, but yeah. So do you think that when they got him, one of the things that they did initially was since he didn't bite that cyanide capsule, do you think that they pull the tooth out? Like, how would you, or would you just, because I don't know how cyanide teeth capsules work. Is it the whole tooth that has to come out, or is it like a pocket in the tooth with the thing in it? I don't know. Anyway,
I'm assuming you have a real tooth removed and then a fake tooth with a
that's kind of filled with cyanide or something that you can crush. It's crushable.
Yeah. So I don't know if they just had a dentist examine to see if he had all his real teeth, or
my God.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, right.
Like, can you imagine? Like, if you have this fake tooth full of cyanide in your mouth, and you're like eating an apple or something, and you bite it wrong, and my God, you have to be so careful. Once you make the decision, I'm going to have a cyanide capsule put in a tooth in the back of my mouth, it's like you're going to, even brushing your teeth, you're going to say, I need to be real careful. I don't want to jostle that tooth.
Flossing.
Right, yeah. Forget flossing. Oh my gosh, I didn't really think about the complexities of...
Yeah, or if you really have to bite down on it, they try to make it like a child-proof cap where you have to intentionally do it. How hard is that too?
Yeah, is it God, I can't get it. I can't get it. Maybe that's what it is. He's been trying to kill himself. He just why can't
work up the jaw strength?
Oh my gosh, Zola and his weak jaw strength.
Yeah.
The untold story.
Yeah. If you see somebody chewing a lot of gum or something, maybe they're in training. But I also feel since he didn't kill himself, that they were a little more secure in knowing that he could be turned or interrogated because he wouldn't kill himself.
Yeah.
I think that's also what they determined.
Well, and it's funny because he walks in here and, goes through the process of getting his glasses back from the guard and puts them back on his face, and then kind of checks the room out. While he's doing this, though, you can hear in the background sounds of torture, I'm assuming, from another room. You hear kind of some screaming, and I'm like, God, this is... It's an interesting setup for this, because clearly the Allies, they're obviously not Hydra agents, because as we will find out, every other Hydra agent that they've ever caught has bit the cyanide capsule and killed themselves. So presumably, I guess they're torturing some Nazis in the other rooms.
Right. Or, we can pretend that the Allies were totally good guys too, and that the screaming and torture was just faked for Zola's auditory experience, but I sadly don't think that's what it was.
Yeah, I know. As much as we'd like to think. I do think that it's funny that the first thing that we see when we cut to this interior shot, aside from the open door and him coming through, to the left of screen is it's a just soft focus, but there's a tap really high on the wall, like ridiculously high, like over Zola's head high. Like, why is this tap so high? And it's dripping. And I'm like, is this like the most tropey element here in this room, aside from, I suppose, the screams coming from the other rooms, but just the fact that there's a drippy tap? I'm like, God, this is just like... Yeah. What a tropey thing to include.
Yeah. Well, it's like super stark for a movie that has been very red, white, and blue, especially in the moments leading up to it. So, yeah, it was played very real war scripty, if not a little cheesy, compared to what we had been getting. So it was quite a switch in how you're supposed to emotionally ingest the scene.
Yeah. And it's much quieter. Like and I suppose that this is, part of the, filmmaking 101, and certainly something that Joe Johnston has shown his proclivity to do, is like, you have these big intense moments. Like, we just had this big montage that went on for a few minutes. It culminated in this, the Howling Commandos and Steve and Bucky attacking this train of Hydras to get Zola, and you've got this battle on this inside of it with Steve, Bucky, and some Hydra troopers, and Bucky dies. Like, it's a kind of a big action moment here in the early 80th 82 through 5 or so of this film. That's been pretty intense, and so this is kind of that moment that we have a little bit of respite. And so here, we have the story going on. Zola is kind of taking a little bit of time to kind of look around, but it's a very quiet minute. And it's a chance for us as the audience to finally just take a breath. And I think that's an important thing to pay attention to.
Process everything that's been happening. And it's also like the start of a new climb, too. I mean, I won't spoil the upcoming minutes, but there's definitely, I think, a purpose to the quiet beyond just this one scene and as a break from the previous.
Definitely. We'll talk more about Zola in the next minute. The only other thing I wanted to bring up here is this, like, he has a very long look at the medical table, and it just made me wonder, like, this is Dr. Arnim Zola, kind of I guess we'd call him kind of a mad scientist. He had been experimenting on Bucky. He had been kind of inventing all these different things for Johann Schmidt. And I can't help but feel like when he sees this medical table, his mind goes to the experiments that he had been doing on Bucky, and the idea, or perhaps the his brain might be going to, I wonder if they're going to be putting me on that and doing the same thing to me. What did you think about the fact that he looks at this table for so long?
Well, I think it was interesting that, at least on screen, Bucky never spoke of what happened to him. Number one, I just took it as a reminder of this was the guy who tortured Bucky. So we're not supposed to feel much sympathy when he in turn might be tortured. But also I felt like he was thinking, like, what did Bucky tell them? Because that would play a lot into his fate then too. Because if they think he has the super serum soldier formula figured out, they're probably going to want to replicate that again. So, which, he needs to be alive to do, and they're going to have to make him willing to do it. So.
Right. Yeah. I definitely want to talk more about Zola and his, the way that he's been portrayed through the film and all of that. I think we can save that for tomorrow, because we're going to be going through an interrogation for quite a while. So,
right.
So let's wrap today up, and we can come back tomorrow to talk more about Zola and kind of what he's thinking, what he's been wanting, all that good stuff. So how's that sound?
Wonderful.
All right. Well, Lorraine, thank you so much for joining me here today on the Marvel Movie Minute.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Well, that's it for today, everybody. So remember, you can learn more about Marvel Movie Minute, what we're up to, over at marvelmovieminute.com. Check out the membership so you can get your episodes early and you can avoid all the ads, all that good stuff. Plus, we have hiatus episodes between the seasons that you can check out. So we will be back next time. So until next time, true believers.
Marvel Movie Minute is a production of True Story FM Engineering by Andy Nelson. This season's music is Spread the News by Anthony Vega, and this season's show art is by Winston Yabo. Find the show at truestory.fm, and if your podcast app allows ratings and reviews, consider doing that for this show.